Welcome to Deserted. Each episode, we welcome a guest into the customs office. There, they must decide which 5 items they want to take with them onto the deserted island. 5 items, 1 island. This is Deserted. Joining me in the customs office for this episode is Don McAllister, and Don's been running screencasts online since 2005, was one of the first people that I knew to offer a premium podcast service of recordings of his desktop, offering people how-tos and tips and tricks based around Mac and iOS applications. Welcome to the customs office, Don McAllister.
Oh, thanks for having me, Matt. It's good to be here.
I do hope you're going to enjoy your stay. I'll ask you that question at the end of the podcast recording, and we'll see whether or not you think you are.
Okay.
Sometimes the customs officer can be a little bit strict. Other times, perfectly fine. I'm in a good mood because this is the start of season 3 of the podcast, so I'm in a good mood. So we'll be all right.
I'll be sure to watch my P's and Q's then in that case.
You'll be fine. We're going to be taking a look at Don's essential must-haves if he's going to be sent off to the island: a website, a podcast, a Twitter feed, a book, and a gadget or device. And those are the 5 can't live without items that Don will take to him for the undisclosed and indeterminable amount of time that Don will be spending on the island. So we shall see. To start off with, we are after your website. Now, we allow Wikipedia by default.
Okay.
So we're after the website that you would like to visit.
Right. Well, to be honest, I tend not to visit websites traditionally. I get all my stuff pretty much through RSS feeds and Twitter and the usual suspects. So I tend not to peruse websites very much. But the one website that, if you take that aside, and if there's one website I had to choose to have a look at, and this sort of feeds into sort of this existence of not having many gadgets with me. The one I've chosen is by Kevin Kelly. It's called Cool Tools. It's kk.org/Cool Tools. Kevin Kelly is... he's a luminary, actually. He's a bit of a forward thinker. I think he was the editor of Wired for a decade or so, and he has a website. But one offshoot of his website is this thing called Cool Tools. And it's basically a place where not just Kevin, but other contributors recommend the best and cheapest tools available. And tools could be anything from sort of your standard hand tools and machines or gadgets to utility bits of software or whole websites, maps, etc. So it's a real eclectic mix of stuff. It's very interesting to see what other people recommend. It can one day, I think these are done on a daily basis. One day it can be something like a really cool chef's knife, and the next day, like today, I've just looked on. It's pre-taped painter's plastic tape. But, people have actually used this and they really like it, and they give some cracking recommendations. So that sort of feeds the geek in me. I can see what other geeks are doing while I'm marooned on the desert island and be envious about all these extra cool tools that are out there.
You don't think you'll end up being too envious and kind of just that will make you feel like you're really missing out?
Not really, because I tend to, although I like a lot of this stuff, I tend not really to buy the stuff. So I'm fairly comfortable in the fact that, I might have bought 1 or 2 things over the past 12 months I've been looking at it. So it's not going to drive me insane, sort of wishing I had that. I sort of can appreciate other geeks and how they appreciate the things that enhance their lives. So it's a bit of enrichment for me, really.
Yeah, talking about the things that were on the website, when I went to vet it to make sure it was perfectly safe for the island, there was something for cycling arm warmers, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, they have some really, really weird things sometimes. But again, things that you'd think, oh, I never even thought I had a need for that. And then, they give you a justification as to why they use it. And a lot of these things are relatively inexpensive as well, sort of plastic spatulas or just really weird things. But, I tend to find the people that are on there are people who really know their stuff, and they just don't like something. They can give valid reasons as to why they use it and why it's better than other things that they've used in the same sort of category. So it's a good find.
Okay. I'm relatively happy with it because I've never been to the site until you mentioned it. I'd never checked it out before, and I think I will keep a little look on that, especially if I'm ever after cycling arm warmers, and I don't want to wear a long sleeve T-shirt or anything crazy. So no, and I don't think it's going to. Well, you've told me it's not going to wind you up by kind of looking at it and being jealous, because we don't allow anything to be delivered to the island from these websites.
Okay. Yep, no, that's okay. Actually, it does actually tie into a book as well, although I'm not going to choose it as a book. But I think it actually, they had the website for a long time, and they actually published a book. It's a huge, sort of like 1.5 foot by 1.5 foot square coffee table book full of cool tools, all with QR codes in that you can scan and have a look at. And I have actually got that book, but I tend to make more use of the site and see the new stuff as it comes in as well.
Don McAllister's choice of website, kk.org. /cool tools by Kevin Kelly. And so let's move on to we're gonna do Twitter feed in a moment, but first of all, podcast. What is going to fill your ears apart from the screeching seagulls on the desert island?
Okay, well, I do listen to podcasts quite a lot, I have to say, although it's quite difficult because I don't do a commute because I work at home, but I suppose on the desert island I'm going to have lots and lots of free time, so there'll be no limit. So it's really difficult to know which podcast to settle for. And I looked at the criteria for going on the desert island, and one of the things did say that if I wanted to forego an object and have two of a similar object, I could do. So what I thought I would try and sort of wing is to skip on the books, because I'm not really a very big book reader. I'm a great buyer of books. I buy loads and loads of books and never actually get around to reading them. So I'm going to forego a book choice if that's possible and have two podcasts. Mm-hmm. So the first podcast being a podcast, and again, this isn't a particularly geeky podcast, and I should say as well, I'm not a political person, and I don't really pay much attention to politics, although, of course, the recent events in America has, I think, got everybody a little bit more interested than they might be normally. But there's a fantastic podcast called No Agenda by Adam Curry, who's actually the Podfather, and John C. Dvorak, who's a bit of a Mac troll, actually. A lot of Mac users don't like John C. Dvorak. But together they do this podcast called No Agenda. And it's basically it's a twice weekly podcast, so there's plenty of content, and it runs for like 2 to 3 hours each week. And it's a deconstruction of what's happening in the media and politics. So it's really interesting and entertaining in that they actually spend a lot of time pulling out clips from all sorts of sources, whether it be from the web or from TV shows or radio shows. And they pull all these clips together and they talk about the clips and how, the mass media is pulling the wool over everyone's eyes, and they try and deconstruct it and give you the true meaning of what's actually going on in the world. And I find that to be really refreshing. It's very entertaining, and it does offer up quite some insight into what actually is going on, not just what you're being told what's going on, but what actually is going on. So that's the first one. That's No Agenda. I don't know if you want to mention that one first.
Yeah, let's mention this one, and then we'll put your second one in the slot that was the book slot. I think that's the way we'll do it today.
Yeah,
and then that way we can just kind of take a proper look at both of those. So No Agenda, yeah, Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak. Of course, we first met Don at Drafts and Darts, which Adam Curry did put on way back in the day.
That's going back a while.
I did a bit of research, and Daily Source Code, which I think for those involved in podcasts for a long, long time was probably the first one, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, the actual podcasting itself was devised by both Adam Curry and a guy called Dave Weiner. Adam Curry had the requirement to do broadcasting without transmitters, and Dave Weiner was the technical geek who actually came up with the RSS specification. So with the work that Adam and Dave Weiner did to get podcasting on the map, we owe a huge amount of gratitude to them. And in the early days, Adam did put on this couple of UK podcaster events. The Daily Source Code was a great podcast, and it was on, I think it was actually a daily podcast, and it was fantastic. In fact, again, personally, I owe a debt of gratitude to Adam, because when I first started doing screencasts online, it was one of the first podcasts to offer premium content and to start up like a membership subscription service. And he actually did give me a shout out on one of his earlier shows, which was really nice of him to do. So, I suppose we do go back a long way. Last time I saw him was over in Dallas for the Podcasters Meetup last year, I think. But this is sort of unrelated to the fact that I like this particular podcast. The No Agenda podcast is a great source of subversive and often entertaining ideas.
You say it's 2 to 3 hours each episode, yeah?
Yeah, I don't know how they keep it up, to be honest, and it's twice a week as well. So there's tons of content. I have to say that there's so much content that in my normal day-to-day activities I can't quite keep up. So I'll normally listen to probably about 2 hours worth of it, and then the next podcast appears in the feed. So I tend to then start listening to the next podcast. So it's very hard to keep up to date with everything that's going on. But
I suppose on the island you'll be fine.
Yeah,
you're gonna have some great time to sit in the evenings.
Yeah,
and kind of swat away the mozzies and listen to No Agenda.
I could always pause it as well and cogitate, and think it through, think what they're saying, and then start up the next bit. So that would be a much better way to consume it.
Okay, we'll go with that for your podcast choice. No Agenda, Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak. So we already know that you're going to jettison your book, but before that, let's talk about Twitter. And you can follow one person on Twitter. Some people do come up with cunning ways of, in a way, following plenty of others. But hey, I'm not going to divulge how they do that. Who is the one follower that you will see their tweets/retweets from?
I struggled with this one because I do follow a significant number of Twitter people as it is. I think I follow about 1,400 people, which some people sort of gasp that I follow that many, but it's really not a problem to me. I tend to find, because I work at home at the moment and I sort of do everything sort of in isolation, Twitter is very much my sort of virtual water cooler. So I tend to, unless I'm really concentrating on something, I'll tend to always to have Twitter open in the sidebar, and I can sort of keep an eye on what's going on, respond, get all my news and stuff like that through. So to actually pull out one particular person, and I did think of pulling out sort of like a news feed or something, or an aggregator, but no, that doesn't go in the spirit of the exercise, I don't think. So in the end, I decided on a guy called Rob Delaney, who is not a geek. He's a comic, so he would provide my my entertainment, my comedic entertainment on the island. Rob Delaney, if people don't know, he's actually he's an American comedian, probably most famous for I think it's Channel 4. They have a comedy show called Catastrophe with, I think, Sharon Hogan. They play a couple. It's very, very grown-up humour indeed, but it's a really, really funny series. I think they're on to series 2 now. But he has the most weird and wonderful Twitter feed. Sometimes surreal, sometimes just funny, sometimes a bit, head-scratching. But I think it's so unusual, and he does retweet a lot of good stuff as well, that would probably keep me going in the into the early hours. So yeah, Rob Delaney.
Okay. When I was taking a look at him, he was apparently once given the award for the funniest person on Twitter. That's
right. In fact, I think he actually met Sharon Hogan. Is it Sharon Hogan? I think it is. But anyway, his fellow writer on Catastrophe and fellow actress, they actually met on Twitter and struck up a friendship and decided to get together and do this TV show. So that's another of his claim to fame as well. And I think he did a really a good selling book as well last year as well, about a comedy book which went down really well.
Okay, Rob Delaney. And I see, even though he's not a geek, he started on Twitter in 2009, which for quite a few people, that's quite early on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2009.
1.2 million followers, so you're not alone in liking what he has to say. So I've got to rubber stamp it and say that's absolutely fine. Phew. At Rob Delaney will be your entertainment from your Twitter feed, and you don't think you're going to sort of miss out on the Apple news?
Well, the problem is, we were saying before about cool tools and how that wouldn't get me envious. If I saw lots of news about new Apple gadgets coming out and I couldn't get to them, that would actually probably be detrimental to my health. So yeah, I'll probably, if I was going to be isolated and not able to get any sort of new gadgets on a regular basis, I probably wouldn't want to know.
Okay, that seems fair enough. Rob Delaney's the Twitter feed. Gadget or device is still to come, but first of all, we know that you wish to do a trade and trade in your book for a second podcast. So, what is this podcast that is more important than a book?
Okay, well, I think I should sort of just defend myself slightly in that I find now at the moment in my current situation very difficult to find the time to actually read books. So as I said before, I tend to buy lots of ebooks and never get around to reading them. So, and again, once I've read a book, I tend not to reread it. So I thought if I was going to be on a desert island, I'm sure I could pick a book out of the catalogue of unread books I've got to take away with me. But once I'd read it, that's it. It's read. So if I had a second podcast, I again get fresh content each week in this case, and that will keep me entertained as well. So the second podcast, and I'm sort of going to contradict myself slightly from what I said about the Twitter feed and not knowing about what's going on in the Apple community. It is actually not strictly an Apple-related podcast, although I suppose it is, because they tend to look at issues through the lens of Apple. And it's a podcast by Horace Dediu called The Critical Path. This has been running for a couple of years now. Horace is an analyst. He's not one of these Wall Street analysts. He actually came from an engineering background. I think he used to work for Nokia, and he became interested in looking at Apple with the iPhone, etc. And he's gone on to become quite an expert in all things Apple and disruption technology and disruption theory. So he really has a good handle on Apple as a company and how they do what they do and why they do it and when they do it and what they're likely to do in the future. And he keeps a firm eye on the earnings and explains how the earnings relate to the real world. He keeps an eye on the products and has theories as to why they sort of develop products in the way that they do. So all in all, he's a really smart guy, and you sort of feel yourself getting more intelligent but just by listening to him. And he has this knack of just being able to talk as well. You can tell that it's not through... it's not scripted. He just has notes and is able to just talk for like half an hour at a time on one particular subject. And interesting as well, he has an interest in cars. So he has a second podcast, which I tend not to listen to very often, but he's now starting to involve more car-related talk into the Critical Path, because obviously there's all this talk and rumouring about Apple's electric car. So he has some good ideas about the car industry. And again, he said has some really interesting ideas on manufacturing of cars and how Apple sort of compare to traditional car manufacturers and how they don't compare and what benefits or what advantages they might have over the incumbents in the industry, and sort of parallels to the iPhone development and iPad development. So all in all, it's a really interesting listen if you're interested in Apple, not just the Apple products, but in Apple as a company, as an organization. He does actually sort of bring out lots of thought-provoking ideas about Apple and where they're going and how they've got to where they are. So always worth a listen to The Critical Path.
On the website itself, it mentions Anders Brownworth. Is he on it anymore?
Yeah, and Anders is on it, but the way it works is that they tend to have like a link guy who will introduce the show, hand over to Horace, and basically Horace then does the whole show. Anders might then interject with a couple of questions or some thoughts as well, but in all fairness, I'm sure Anders wouldn't object to me saying that the main guy is Horace. It's his thoughts, etc., that make up The Critical Path. Historically, he came, it's still 5x5, but he had Dan Benjamin on as doing the Anders role, and then he had another guy as well. No, I can never remember this guy's name, but they sort of take an anchor role within the podcast, but it's really Horace who gives his thoughts, etc.
And it's a weekly podcast, is it?
It tends to be weekly, although sometimes, because he does a lot of travelling, he's in demand all over the world, really, for consultancy and for speaking engagements. It tends to be weekly, but sometimes you might have a break of a week or two. Also, sometimes the audio quality, it's one of those podcasts where the audio quality sometimes isn't quite up to scratch, again, because it might be from the same location, or he might be using his iPhone to phone in or whatever. But it's one of those whereby, the content will allow you to get over the production value sometimes. It's normally over an hour, probably about an hour and a half. What I've noticed happening now as well is he has quite a big following, so he will tend to answer like half an hour of questions at the end as well when people are asking him about specific things or previous shows. So he will do like a Q&A at the end of each podcast, which adds like half an hour onto the podcast. So I would say between an hour and a half is the average length.
Okay. I'm really torn as to whether to allow it or not, but I think, as I said earlier, I'm in a good mood, so I think I will.
Oh, you had me worried there for a second there.
I think I will. Yeah, in a way, it's quite odd because I think a lot of people, when they think about going to a desert island, sometimes they think, "Oh, great! This will give me the opportunity to do something that I've been putting off and read that book." There's always been that book, but interesting that you've decided to trade your book for the second podcast. So
yeah, see, I did go through. I said, right, because I buy books both on the iBook store and also on the Kindle, and I have literally got probably 24 books that I bought and never read, and I thought, well, which is the book that's sort of screaming out to me, read me? And there were one or two perhaps, but then I thought, well, once I've read it, it's done, and no, I think I prefer a second podcast.
Okay, no problem. We'll go with that.
Cool.
The Critical Path is Don's book replacement podcast, 5by5.tv/critical path. By the way, all the links to Don's suggestions will be up on the website, and that's where you will find the episode, and you can also hear from previous visitors to the island. All right, then, the fifth and final choice of a must-have item to take to the island is a gadget or device. What have you gone for?
Again, struggled slightly with this because, again, the rulings are it can't be a computer, a mobile phone, or other broadcast communications or internet access device. And most of my gadgets fall into that category, so I did have to scratch my head about this. But I ended up thinking, well, if I'm going to take a gadget, I'll go hardcore and take my mirrorless 4/3 camera. Which is something I only recently got into, actually. It was only last year, I think the beginning of last year. It might have been the end of the year before. I've never really been into photography at all. It's never really interested me. Obviously, I do these screencasts on Screencasts Online, and they are, although it's video, so I'm quite conversant with editing video, and I used to take like holiday videos and stuff. I used to just use a bog standard camcorder if I was taking video. Never really worried about it too much. And then, 4K video came on the scene, and I thought, well, I really should get into 4K video, and the iPhone didn't support 4K at the time. But these sort of consumer or prosumer level mirrorless 4/3 cameras were all starting to come out with 4K capabilities. So I thought to myself, I'll get one of these. So I ended up with a Panasonic GH4, which is a smallish camera, but it has the micro 4/3 lens format. So I sort of got the camera primarily to experiment with 4K video and started to play with that. But then, of course, you have to think about lenses. And again, I'd never really been into lenses or anything on cameras, never had to worry about it. So I started to research some lenses, started to understand how these sort of type of cameras work and what the different lenses do. And I actually got quite interested in it. So it went from being just a video recorder to test out recording 4K video to something that I quite enjoy. I quite enjoy now taking the video and using the different lenses for different types of scenarios, but also photography as well. I started to learn about focusing and depth of field and stuff like that. So again, not really that much time to play with it. So I thought, well, if I go to the desert island, I'd have my Panasonic GH4, tons of lenses, and I presume also some memory cards, and I'd have to find something to play on, although you can play back on the screen on the camera itself, but we might have to rig up something that wasn't an internet access device, just a plain monitor or something. But anyway, apart from that, I'd like to spend the time and just experiment with it and learn to know in more depth how to use it, and experiment by taking photographs around the island and playing with video, stuff like that.
Do you happen to use that one for your tips of the week that you've started doing, or?
Yes, I will be in the next few weeks, because the ones that are posted now I actually had someone come in to help me set up the camera, and they used their own camera. But now I've got my own GH4. I did buy a gadget for it, which is a teleprompt device that fits on the front, so I can actually see notes as I'm actually speaking to camera, because that's always difficult. But from probably in the next 2 weeks or so, if you look at some of the preview videos or this week's preview video telling you about this week's screencast, that was recorded with the GH4, and the tips of the weeks will be recorded with that sort of going forward from this point on.
Okay, so people can check out what it looks like on those. And so it's 4K video and, from my research, 16 megapixel images.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
It's a really nice camera. The only bugbear that I have with it, and that's because it's an EU or a UK-based camera, is that they've, due to some weird and wonderful EU restriction, well, it's not so much an EU restriction, but so they don't pay duty on the camera, they disable the video. You can only take up to 30 minutes video at a time.
Oh.
Whereas the US version will just take as much video as the memory card will hold, but this is sort of limited in firmware to just taking 30 minutes. That's my only real niggle about it, to be honest, but everything else, it's great. It's a really nice camera, very easy to use, very light, very simple to set up and to get to grips with.
So yes, with the memory card, do you think you will have some issues with it filling up and having to delete images? Do you think that's going to be a bit of a problem for you?
Possibly, although I could also take, I suppose, a selection of memory cards. It depends how long I'm going to be on the island for. I mean, if I'm on the island forever, I just have to bite the bullet and just reformat it each time.
Yeah.
And
I suppose it's an interesting one, really. And one of the reasons why I like this format is, I don't know the answer to how long you're going to be on the island for, but I wonder if over time, when you kind of eventually think to yourself, actually, I think I'm going to be on here all the time. I wonder whether that would cut down your taking the photos.
Well, possibly, but then if that was the case, you might consider sort of turning it on yourself and using it to keep some sort of video diary, because you could. I mean, I've got a 128 gig memory card on there as it is, and you could always, take photos and then delete photos individually. You don't have to format the whole card, so you could, if you wanted to, create a video diary and just keep those sort of small clips. You wouldn't necessarily have to record in 4K if you're doing a video diary. You can actually bump it down to 1080p so it doesn't use up as much space. You can trim the videos as well in camera. So you could in theory, create a video diary for posterity for when they, if and when people turn up and find you.
All right. I'm quite happy with that. It's an interesting one because there's been some quite practical ones in previous episodes, pen knives, things to start fires and stuff like that. So,
but again, I sort of took it to be something that I have and not would want. So, and I don't have any practical gadgets.
How long do you think you're going to survive for?
I don't
Are you
know,
concerned?
No, that's okay. I mean, there'll be sticks, and I've watched enough YouTube videos to know how to start a fire without having to have a special device. I don't know. I'd persevere. I'd get through, I suppose. But yeah, I sort of wasn't looking at my own self-interest there. I was looking at more of my sort of keeping my time occupied.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's fine because I'm thinking, well, that'll give you something to do. It'll make you feel like you're improving because you'll have the time to put in, and you'll be able to look back in the evening, using that instead of a fire for your any bit of light that you need.
Yeah, and also, I mean, one of the lenses is like a telephoto lens, so that could be useful for keeping an eye open for ships at sea or whatever. Looking on the horizon, scanning the horizon, see if anyone's coming.
Yes, because you could use it has it got a flash on it? You could use it as a way. I hardly. It's such a good low light camera that I can't even remember if it's got a pop up flash. I think it might have a pop up flash on it, but I've never ever used it because it's such a good camera in low light that I never need it. Because the flash may be useful for flagging down passing boats.
Yeah,
so
true. And if the lens, I actually probably wouldn't work. Wondering if you could use some of the lenses to do different things. Magnifying or concentrating the sun's light into point to start a fire or something. If things got desperate, you could always smash up a lens, although probably wouldn't want to do that. But
I'm liking the ideas there. So that's got to go on the list. The Panasonic GH4 is your gadget or device to take along, and that is your fifth and final one. So you've been successful in getting them all through.
A clean sheet.
Yeah, I'm gonna rubber stamp that selection. I'm gonna write it on your carnet, and you'll be okay to take that through. Do you think you're going to enjoy your time on the island?
Initially, I think a couple of weeks will probably be okay. Any longer than that, it's probably going to start to be a bit strained. Yeah, I wouldn't like it to be like a permanent arrangement, but a couple of weeks in isolation, away from the internet and plenty of thinking time would probably be a nice thing.
Okay. And can you recommend anyone that you think you would like sent to a desert island for a spell of time that you think we should speak to?
I was racking my brains, but we did just before we started recording the show, we did mention one particular other UK podcaster who might be pretty interesting to get on the show, and that would be Ewan Rankin.
I'm writing him down.
So that would be very interesting to see what gadgets Ewan wants to take with him.
Okay, I shall be in touch, see whether he takes up the challenge.
Uh-huh.
So thank you for your time, and I hope you do enjoy your stay on the island.
Well, thank you. It was very interesting, actually. It's and thought-provoking as well. It's not often you get asked to bring some stuff onto a desert island, so it does make you think and sort of see where your priorities lie.
Is there anything that you would like to mention or plug on the podcast while I've got you here?
Well, we've mentioned it several times now, but screencastonline.com is the main source of my weekly tutorials. I have got an app that people can download and have a look at some free stuff and purchase individual tutorials. It's called the SEO Showcase app. That's for iOS and for the Apple TV. And there is a YouTube channel as well, Screencast Online. Check out some of the free stuff and some of the previous stuff across at Screencast Online.
Thanks for listening to Deserted. To listen to previous episodes, either subscribe in Apple Podcasts, your podcast app of choice, or head to desertedpodcast.com. Please leave a review on iTunes, and if you want to send a message in a bottle with feedback, or you would like to be on a future episode, send it to customs@desertedpodcast.com.